The Galactic Council had always considered humans to be paradoxes wrapped in flesh. They were neither the strongest nor the fastest, lacking the natural armor of the Kryn or the telepathic prowess of the Solari. Yet somehow, these soft-skinned bipeds had clawed their way from a backwater planet to become one of the most respected species in the known galaxy. Eris Vale had heard all the whispers. As the only human aboard the deep space research vessel Quantum Horizon, she'd become accustomed to the sidelong glances, the cautious distance her crewmates maintained. They respected her work as a xenobiologist, but there was always that underlying current of uncertainty. Humans were unpredictable, dangerous in ways the other species couldn't quite articulate. The mission was simple: catalog the flora and fauna of Drakkar 7th, an uncharted world teeming with life. The planet's dominant species, the Vrakesh, were apex predators, massive scaled creatures with rows of crystalline teeth and eyes that burned like molten amber. They hunted in packs, their social structure complex and ruthlessly efficient. Eris had spent weeks observing them from a distance, documenting their behavior with the kind of meticulous care that had earned her 3 commendations from the Council. She'd learned their patterns, their territories, their hierarchies. The Vrakesh were beautiful in their savagery, and she respected them in the way one respects a force of nature. It was on the 43rd day that everything changed. She'd been tracking a hunting pack through the crimson forests when she heard it, a sound that pierced through the alien canopy like a blade. High-pitched, desperate, filled with agony, a cub's scream. Eris's blood ran cold. She'd studied enough predator species to know that sound, universal somehow, across 1,000 worlds, the cry of a young creature in mortal pain. Her training screamed at her to stay back, to observe, to not interfere with natural processes. But something older than training, something primal and human, propelled her forward. She crashed through the undergrowth, her pulse rifle clutched tight, and emerged into a clearing where nightmare had taken form. The cub, barely the size of a large dog, was caught in a hunter's snare, one of the illegal traps poachers from off-world sometimes planted. The metal wire had bitten deep into its hind leg, and purple blood pooled beneath it. But worse than the trap was what surrounded it. 6 full-grown Vrakesh circled the cub, their hackles raised, teeth bared. At first, Eris thought they were trying to free it. Then she saw the truth in their body language, in the way they stalked and snapped at the injured youngster. They were going to kill it. In Vrakesh society, weakness was death. An injured cub was a liability, a drain on resources, a genetic dead end. The pack would eliminate it and move on, efficient, logical, cruel. The cub screamed again, and something inside Eris Vale snapped. "No!" The word came out as a growl, low and dangerous. The Vrakesh closest to her whirled, its amber eyes locking onto this strange, soft creature that had dared interrupt their judgment. Eris stepped forward, and the human part of her brain cataloged everything with crystalline clarity. 6 adults, each outweighing her by 300 pounds. Claws that could disembowel with a single swipe, jaws that could crush bone. She should have been terrified. Instead, she roared. The sound that tore from her throat was primordial, a challenge that bypassed language and spoke directly to something ancient and universal. It was the sound of a mother bear defending her cubs, of a wolf alpha asserting dominance, of every human ancestor who had ever stood their ground against the dark. It was the sound of a predator who refused to back down. The Vrakesh froze. Every single one of them went absolutely still, their heads cocked in confusion, and something that might have been recognition. This tiny creature, barely a mouthful, had just issued a challenge that resonated in their very bones. Eris didn't give them time to process. She charged forward, firing her pulse rifle into the air, not at them, but close enough to make them flinch. The energy bolts crackled through the air like thunder, and she kept roaring, kept moving, kept being larger than her size should have allowed. "Back! Back!" she screamed, and though they couldn't understand her words, they understood her intent. The pack leader, a massive male with scars crisscrossing his snout, took a step toward her. A challenge. A test. Eris met his gaze and didn't blink. In that moment, she channeled every documentary she'd ever watched, every bit of human stubbornness that had carried her species from the caves to the stars. She spread her arms wide, making herself bigger, and let out another roar that echoed through the forest. The pack leader's ears flattened. Something passed behind those alien eyes, not fear exactly, but a recalculation. This strange creature was willing to die for a cub that wasn't even her own species. That kind of insanity was dangerous, unpredictable. Slowly, deliberately, the pack leader turned away. One by one, the others followed, melting back into the crimson forest like shadows. The clearing fell silent except for the cub's labored breathing. Iris's hands shook as she holstered her rifle and approached the injured youngster. It growled at her, weak but defiant, and she smiled despite everything. "I know, kid. I know. But we're doing this." It took her 20 minutes to carefully dismantle the trap, whispering nonsense words the whole time. The cub bit her twice, drawing blood, but she worked through it. When she finally freed the mangled leg and applied emergency medical foam from her kit, the cub looked at her with those burning amber eyes, and something passed between them. Not understanding, perhaps, but acknowledgement. She carried the cub back to the ship, all 30 pounds of hissing, struggling predator, and her crewmates stared at her like she'd grown a second head. "You interfered with a natural process," the Solari navigator said, his mental voice tinged with disapproval. "You could have been killed." "Yeah," Eris said, settling the sedated cub into the medical bay. "I could have." "Why?" the Kryn engineer asked, genuine confusion in her multifaceted eyes. "It wasn't your offspring. It wasn't even your species." Eris looked down at the sleeping cub, its chest rising and falling peacefully now, its leg wrapped in regenerative bandages. She thought about all the times in human history when her people had done the inexplicable, adopting orphaned wolf cubs, befriending wild dolphins, mourning the deaths of animals they'd never met. "Because it screamed," she said simply, and someone needed to answer. 3 weeks later, when they returned the healed cub to Drakkar 7th, the pack was waiting. The leader approached slowly, and for a heart-stopping moment, Eris thought she'd made a terrible mistake. Then the massive predator lowered his head, not in submission, but in something that might have been respect. The cub bounded forward, reuniting with its pack, and Eris watched them disappear into the forest. "Humans," the Solari navigator said, shaking his head, "you're all insane." Eris smiled. "Yeah, but we're the kind of insane that roars louder." And in the depths of space, among species that had evolved a million different ways, that particular brand of human madness had earned something no amount of strength or technology ever could: the acknowledgement that sometimes compassion was the most terrifying weapon of all. The galaxy had learned, once again, why humanity was never to be underestimated. Not because they were the strongest or the fastest, but because when a predator cub screamed in pain, a human would stand between it and death and dare the universe itself to argue.